Darius Ellison was 40 years old on the morning his wife raised her right hand in a Memphis courtroom and swore to tell the truth. He drove a 7-year-old Chevy Silverado. He wore the same brand of steel-toed boots he had worn since the Army. Her attorney had introduced him in the preceding filings as a city building inspector with a modest government salary and no significant independent assets. And Camille, who had been sitting 3 feet to his right in that marriage for 9 years, did not correct a single word of it. She testified for 22 minutes. She described a marriage in which she had been the primary financial contributor. She said he had hidden income. She said she had financed his business ventures. She said she had no knowledge of any trust account in his name. She said all of it under oath, in a wood-paneled courtroom on a cold November morning, with her attorney nodding in small confirmations from the counsel table, while Darius sat in the gallery and did not move, and did not speak, and did not change his expression by a single degree. The trust she claimed to know nothing about held $4.1 million. She had signed the notarized acknowledgement of its existence herself, twice. What Camille had never thought to ask, not once in 9 years of marriage, was what Darius had done before the building inspector position, or whose initials were saved under FCI in his contact list, or why a man on a government salary had retained one of the most decorated forensic financial attorneys in the state of Tennessee. The judge had not yet seen what was in the exhibit binders on Beverly Okafor's table. That was about to change. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The Memphis autumn came in sideways that year, the way it sometimes did. Warm one morning, cold the next, as though the season couldn't quite commit to what it wanted to be. Darius Ellison had always appreciated that ambiguity. A city that couldn't make up its mind was a city that rewarded patience. He was at his kitchen table at 6:40 on a Tuesday, working through a set of inspection reports with a red pen and a cup of coffee that had been hot when he poured it. The kitchen was a room he had renovated himself, the tile work along the backsplash, the cabinet hardware he had replaced one autumn Saturday while Camille was visiting her sister in Jackson. Small, precise improvements, the kind that showed only to the person who had done them. The house in Germantown had been his before it became theirs. He had purchased it at 31, 3 years before Camille, with a down payment drawn from savings nobody knew about except his financial advisor and his Aunt Lorraine. He had renovated it room by room across 2 years of evenings, and by the time Camille moved in after the wedding, it was the kind of house that people assumed had required more money than Darius appeared to have. No one asked where it had come from. People rarely asked the questions that would have complicated the story they had already decided on. His mother, Vivian Ellison, had run the accounting department for a private equity firm in Nashville for 26 years before her death. She used to sit across from him at the kitchen table of his childhood home and say, "Numbers don't lie, baby. People do. Learn to read the numbers and you'll always know what people are actually saying." She had been gone 6 years. He still ran every significant decision through the lens of what she would have said about it. He had met Camille at a fundraiser for a community literacy program, a winter event at a hotel downtown, the kind of thing he attended because his firm's pro bono commitment required visible community engagement, and the kind of thing she attended because she was in nonprofit development, and these were her rooms. She was warm and specific in conversation, genuinely funny, and possessed of a directness that he found rare and attractive. She asked him what he actually did all day. He gave her the building inspector answer, the one he always gave in rooms where he didn't yet know who was listening. She laughed and said she didn't believe him. He had liked that very much. They were married 18 months later in a ceremony at a garden venue outside the city. His Aunt Lorraine was in the front row. His mother's photograph was on the table at the entrance. 9 years was a long time. The good years had been genuinely good. He had no desire to pretend otherwise. And the slow cooling that had crept into the marriage over the past 2 had been the kind of cooling that didn't announce itself. A change in frequency. The questions she used to ask, she no longer asked. The plans she used to include him in, she now made differently. She had started keeping her phone in her car overnight, a habit she explained once and never mentioned again. He did not press. He observed. His federal consulting credentials, held through a private LLC registered to a Nashville address, were on no document in the house, on no device connected to their shared network, and in no account Camille had ever accessed. That had been true since before the wedding, and he had maintained it the way a careful man maintained any structural distinction, not from suspicion, but from the professional understanding that clean separations prevented expensive complications later. His secondary phone, the one that connected to the LLC and to the 9 federal agency contacts who knew precisely who Darius Ellison was, lived in his jacket's inner pocket where it had always been, unknown to her. 2 mornings before the first court filing arrived by courier, he sat down with his coffee and found a discrepancy in the household expense summary he ran at the end of every month. $43. He set his mug down. He opened the ledger. He began. He pulled 17 months of household statements and built a comparison ledger with the focused patience of a man who had spent a decade constructing financial forensic cases for federal agencies and understood that the first discrepancy was almost never the last one. It took him 4 hours. By the time the coffee had gone cold for the second time, the picture was complete. 31 transfers over 14 months, individually unremarkable, ranging from $38 to $312, collectively precise. The amounts had been calibrated to stay beneath both his monthly review threshold and the automatic flagging parameters of their bank. Someone with financial sophistication had set the intervals. This was not a spending habit. This was a systematic drain. Total, $6,400 moved to an external account he had never authorized. His hands didn't shake. He cross-referenced the partial routing number against his professional database and traced the account to a credit union in East Memphis. The secondary account holder's name appeared as a partial match in a civil court filing he pulled from the county clerk's public records within the hour. Derek Beal, age 46, attorney, family law. He sat with that for a moment. A family law attorney, the timeline of the transfers ran parallel to Camille's pattern of altered behavior. The late arrivals, the phone in the car, the redesigned future she seemed to be constructing just outside his line of sight. He had observed all of it with the steady neutral attention of a man who knew that premature conclusions were the single most expensive error in forensic work. Now the conclusion had arrived on its own. She had been planning this for 14 months. The pre-filed divorce petition, he found it in the courthouse's electronic filing system, submitted but not yet formally served, listed him as a city employee with a salary of $67,000, no independent business holdings, and no trust assets. It alleged that Camille had been the primary financial contributor to the marriage and that Darius had concealed income from her. He read it twice. His face remained perfectly calm. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions when something genuinely mattered. He opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it Ellison v. Ellison, Respondent. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person he knew would understand exactly what he was holding. Beverly Okafor answered on the second ring. She was 57 years old, a former federal prosecutor turned matrimonial asset litigator, and her firm had retained Darius as a forensic consultant on 4 separate engagements over the past decade. She knew exactly who he was, what he did, and what a 14-month financial extraction scheme looked like when the man on the other end of it happened to have built his career reading exactly that. "Tell me when," he said. "Tomorrow morning," she said. 8 o'clock. Bring everything. He set the phone face down on the table. Preparation was the work. Everything else was just the day the work showed up. Beverly Okafor's firm occupied a Victorian building off Madison Avenue that she had purchased and restored with deliberate intent. A building that looked nothing like the modern glass towers her opponents typically worked from and felt nothing like them. Solid floors, weighted silences, a conference room with bookshelves floor to ceiling, law review journals filed by year, a corner window that faced east and let the morning light come in first. She was at the table with 2 members of her team when Darius arrived at 8 sharp. He laid the documentation out in order. The 17-month ledger, the transfer analysis, the partial account trace, the court filing Camille believed he had not yet seen. The full timeline he had built in 4 hours at a kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a decade of professional pattern recognition. Beverly read in silence. Her team read in silence. "The routing trace," Beverly said without looking up. "How tight is the chain of custody?" "Federal-grade methodology," he said. "The same documentation standard I use on government contracts. It will hold." She set the final page down and looked at him across the table. She filed the petition with Derek Beal's name on the pleadings. She does not know that you know that name. No, he said. She does not know what you do. No. Beverly folded her hands. Then we are going to allow her to build her entire case on a foundation she doesn't understand is made of paper. She paused once. At every hearing, every deposition, every conference, you say exactly as much as I advise you to say, and not one word more. You present as the man she believes you are. Can you do that? He had spent the better part of his professional life sitting in rooms where he knew things that no one else in the room knew yet, holding his expression steady while the information moved at its own pace. Yes, he said. Good. Because when the moment comes, I want every lie already in the record. Real power, Darius thought, on the drive south, operated in quiet rooms, and in rooms where the most prepared man appeared to be the least interesting one present. His Aunt Lorraine Ellison Washington was 68 years old, a retired Shelby County principal with the posture of a woman who had managed other people's crises for 4 decades and had long since stopped being surprised by the shape they took. She was in her garden when he pulled into the driveway, cutting back the rose canes along the fence, with the focused efficiency of someone who had no patience for things that had stopped producing. He sat on the back porch steps and told her everything. She listened with her hands still and her eyes on him the way she always had. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Your mother always said, Camille asked the right questions too fast, she said. Like she was building a file, not a relationship. She set the pruning shears on the fence post and looked at him directly. You going to be all right? Yes, ma'am. Quiet, complete, leave nothing loose. She picked the shears back up. And don't let that attorney get under your skin in the courtroom. That is his one job. Your job is to be the most uninteresting man in the room until Beverly decides otherwise. He thought about that on the drive home. Some things you didn't say. You let the record say them for you. Beverly's forensic subcontractor, a former IRS special agent named Clifton, who worked with the unhurried precision of a man who had audited corporate ledgers for 31 years, took 2 weeks with Camille's complete financial profile. The report arrived as a 61-page PDF on a Friday morning. The $6,400 in household transfers was the surface. Beneath it, Camille had opened 4 separate accounts in the preceding 18 months, routing small amounts from overlapping sources in a pattern designed to obscure both origin and destination. 2 of those accounts showed correlating deposits with outflows toward Derek Beals LLC, a family law practice operating entity that had itself filed a set of suspect expense claims in the prior fiscal year. Beal had not merely advised her. He had participated in the financial architecture of what she intended to claim as marital contributions. Darius read the 61 pages in a single sitting. He gave the work the professional acknowledgement it deserved. This was not a careless plan. This had been engineered. And then he set that acknowledgement aside and returned to the question of what Beverly needed from him next. 3 weeks before the first hearing, Camille came home from a weekend away and made dinner. She was relaxed. She was warm. She asked about his week with the easy fluency of a woman who had already decided the outcome of the conversation she was in. He answered her questions. He passed the salt. He complimented the food. He was the most uninteresting man at the table. He had never been better at it. The morning of the first evidentiary hearing was cold and clear, the kind of Memphis November morning that arrived without ambiguity, the sky a steady, committed gray. Darius wore a plain navy suit, the one he kept for government consulting appearances. He arrived at the courthouse with Beverly and 2 members of her team at 8:50. He sat where she directed. He placed his hands flat on the table in front of him. He did not touch his phone. Camille arrived at 9:05 with Derek Beal at her left shoulder, dressed in the careful way of someone who had prepared for an audience. Beal was a compact man in his mid-40s, with the practiced confidence of an attorney who believed his preparation was the most thorough in any room he entered. He had filed 8 motions in the preceding 3 weeks. His financial disclosure document described Darius Ellison as a man of modest means with a single government income stream and no significant independent holdings, a description that fit the man he believed he had researched completely. The Honorable Patricia Ware presided, 58 years old, former federal appellate clerk, known in Shelby County for the precision with which she moved through financial complexity and the particular brevity with which she communicated her assessments of people who had wasted her time. She opened the proceedings. Beal stood first, and presented his narrative. He was smooth. He had rehearsed. He described a marriage in which his client had made substantial financial contributions, while her husband's income had remained inadequately disclosed. He referenced the trust account, the $4.1 million held in Darius's name, and characterized it as an asset his client had been kept in deliberate ignorance of. He used the word concealment 3 times. He used opacity twice. He used the word partnership 7 times, and each time he said it, the word landed like something he had decided in advance would resonate. Darius sat. He watched Beale perform. He watched Camille at the counsel table, composed, nodding at measured intervals, hands folded in the studied posture of an aggrieved party who had thoroughly prepared for this moment and believed that preparation was sufficient. Beale called her to the stand. She testified for 22 minutes. She said she had no knowledge of the trust prior to filing. She said the household finances had been primarily her responsibility. She said Darius had withheld income from her during the marriage. She said she had contributed from her own earnings to the down payment on their primary residence. She said she had no knowledge of any business entity in his name. Every word of it in the record, every word of it documented against the 214 pages Beverly's team had assembled across 7 weeks of careful, unannounced work. Darius did not move. He did not write a note. He did not look at Beverly. He did not look at Camille. He gave no indication in any direction that anything in the room was anything other than exactly what it appeared to be. Beale concluded his direct examination and sat. He aligned his papers with the quiet satisfaction of a man who believed he had just controlled the morning. Beverly Okafor stood up. She did not look at Beale. She did not look at Camille. She looked at Judge Ware with the measured calm of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment and had prepared for it across every available hour. Your Honor, the respondent would like to introduce Exhibit Sets A through R, comprising 214 pages of certified financial documentation. I would ask the court to take particular note of Exhibit C, the notarized acknowledgement of trust existence signed by the petitioner on 2 separate occasions during the marriage. March of last year and the preceding November. She set the exhibit binder on the clerk's table. The sound it made was quiet, complete. Judge Ware's expression reorganized. Not dramatically. A woman of her experience and tenure did not perform surprise in open court, but something shifted behind her eyes with the particular quiet of a person who has just identified precisely what is in front of her and has begun the calculation of what it means. Beverly continued. Exhibit F, Darius Ellison's LLC registration and federal consulting credentials. 14 years of certified contract work for 3 separate government agencies. The professional designation that appeared nowhere in Beale's filings because Beale had constructed his entire case on the assumption that Camille knew everything there was to know about the man she had married. She had no idea what they would have been looking at. Exhibit K, the forensic account analysis. 31 transfers over 14 months, $6,400 extracted through a methodology specifically calibrated to avoid detection by someone with professional financial expertise. The routing trace, the credit union account, the secondary account holder, Derek Beale's name. The room changed. It changed the way rooms changed when a structural element revealed itself to be unsound. Not with noise, not with drama, but completely in every direction simultaneously, and there was nothing to do once it happened except account for where everything now stood. Beale's composure held for approximately 4 seconds. Then it did what all unprepared things did when the load exceeded the design. Camille looked at Darius. He looked back at her. He had nothing to perform. He met her gaze with the steady, neutral attention of a man who had found every number she had moved and had felt every one of them, and had then put each feeling in its proper place, and continued working. He gave her nothing to use and nothing to answer, because there was nothing left that required either of them to say anything at all. Beverly spoke for 11 more minutes. She did not rush. She placed each exhibit with the precision of a woman who understood that the timing of information was as important as the information itself, and that a courtroom was, at its foundation, a room about records and what they revealed when placed in sequence. When she finished, she sat. Judge Ware looked at the exhibit binders. Then she looked at Beale. The expression she turned on him was not angry. Anger required some degree of surprise. What it was instead was the settled, clear assessment of a judge who had been in this room long enough to know exactly what she was seeing. She said enough. Proceedings were suspended pending a referral to the bar's Professional Conduct Review Committee. The court would be appointing an independent forensic examiner. Beale was advised, in language that required no interpretation, that his participation in any further proceedings in this matter would be addressed as a separate consideration. Camille sat at the table. The room had been fully built around her, and she was the only person in it who hadn't known the blueprint. Darius stood. He straightened his jacket. He nodded once to Beverly. He did not look at the plaintiff's table as he walked out. He had already built the document that described everything there was to see there, and he had no need to review his own work. He walked through the courthouse doors and out into the November morning and stood for a moment on the steps in the cold, clear air. He thought about his mother at the kitchen table in Nashville, teaching him that the numbers were the truest language available to anyone patient enough to learn to read them. She had been right. They never lied. 10 months passed like water. Darius moved into a craftsman home in the Cooper Young neighborhood, a quiet block with old oaks and a corner property that had been waiting 3 years for someone patient enough to restore it correctly. He did the work himself on weekends, section by section, with the focused unhurry of a man who had nothing left to prove and everything still ahead of him worth building properly. The floors were heart pine refinished to the color of good whiskey in the late afternoon light. The kitchen was his own design. He set the tile himself, small hexagons in a pattern his mother had shown him once from an old design book she kept on the shelf above her desk, and he set them with the patience that precision required and had always required and would always require of anyone who wanted to produce something worth keeping. He planted a Japanese maple by the gate in early March and ran a drip line to the raised garden beds he built along the south fence on a Saturday that smelled like coming rain. His federal consulting work had expanded. A new engagement with a forensic audit division out of Nashville brought the LLC's annual contract revenue past $900,000 for the first time. He sat with that number for 2 days before doing anything about it. Then he called his financial advisor, and they built the next phase together in the same way he built everything, one sound, verified piece at a time. He had begun mentoring 2 young men from a community finance literacy program on Saturday mornings, teaching them what his mother had taught him across a childhood of kitchen table sessions: how to read a ledger the way most people read a face, how to find the thing that had been quietly moved. He heard her voice when he taught. He led it. A woman named Celeste had come into his life through Aunt Lorraine, who had made the introduction with the deliberate timing of a woman who trusted herself completely to know when a moment was right. Celeste was a family medicine physician, careful, specific, and possessed of the quality Darius had always respected most in anyone he spent time with. She said what she meant, and meant precisely what she said, without adjustment for the room. She asked good questions on the first night they had dinner and listened to the answers with the attention of someone who genuinely intended to remember them. He heard about Camille the way you heard about things you had decided not to pursue. Derek Beale had been placed on interim suspension pending the bar investigation's conclusion. The independent forensic examiner's findings had expanded the review beyond the matrimonial proceeding into Beale's broader billing practices, a development whose consequences had extended well past the Ellison matter. Camille had settled under terms the court structured without her input, reflecting precisely what she had contributed to a marriage she had begun exiting before she served a single document. She had relocated to a smaller city in Mississippi. The mutual acquaintances had gone quiet in the particular way of people recalibrating the coordinates of a story they had thought they understood. He did not register satisfaction about any of it. He felt the clean, neutral recognition of a process that had run correctly to completion. On a Saturday morning in late September, Darius sat on the front porch of the Cooper Young house with his coffee and watched the light move through the old oaks that lined the street. Specific, patient light, the kind Memphis produced in autumn when the season had finally committed to what it wanted to be. The tile in the kitchen had set perfectly. The floors gleamed in the way that heart pine gleamed when you had taken the time to do it right. The Japanese maple by the gate had turned its first red, small and clean against the gray of the morning sky. He thought of his mother. He thought of what she had taught him at the kitchen table about numbers and truth and the precise patience required to tell one from the other. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.